Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rick Happy, Chair of CCS Fundraising, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on the 2025 Philanthropy Pulse report. We're thrilled that you've joined us as we dive into the latest insights that will help shape the future of philanthropy. Today's webinar will focus on key data and trends from our 2025 CCS Philanthropy Pulse report, offering a data-driven look at the evolving landscape of fundraising. We will then transition into a robust conversation with our esteemed panelists, where they will share strategies and support that will help all of us in navigating the future of fundraising. Please welcome me in briefly joining Dennis Surrett, Executive Vice President and Chief Development Officer of the National Urban League, Eileen Heitzman, former President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Philanthropic Trust, Kellyanne Nakayama, Chief Development Officer at the Japanese American National Museum. We're delighted the three of you have joined us today as panelists, and we are deeply, deeply grateful. At CCS, we've been proud partners to nonprofits for nearly 80 years, guiding organizations across all sectors to elevate their fundraising and philanthropic strategies. Our commitment to thought leadership, coupled with our dedication to advancing the causes that matter most, drives everything we do. And today is no exception. We're excited to share these findings that will hopefully empower you and your organization as you continue to make a transformative impact in your communities. As we gather today, we recognize that January has brought significant change. Federal executive orders and policy shifts are already impacting many nonprofit organizations. And while some sectors are waiting to see what unfolds, others are already adapting their strategies. Change is a constant in our field, and while we may not have every answer, what we do have is experience. Throughout our history, CCS has helped nonprofits navigate moments of great transformation, stress, and uncertainty. And one thing is always true: thoughtful strategy leads to long-term success. From our work with organizations across all sectors, we've reinforced a few key principles that can guide us through change. Respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. Assess your funding landscape carefully. Lean into fundraising and donor communication. Personalize outreach to meet donors where they are. And above all, prioritize your people. I alluded to our experience. We've been through some challenging times. COVID was very challenging. The Great Recession, 15, now almost 20 years ago, was very challenging. And one of the things we found is that when organizations are in moments of uncertainty, pausing or pushing the brakes on things, not moving forward, is almost always the wrong answer. We see organizations that are on the front foot, moving forward assertively, tailoring their strategies and their plans and their cases for support, and they come out on the other side of these kinds of moments better served, better positioned for future growth. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope that the insights shared today will support your continued growth and success. And it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Natalie Skinner, Managing Director here at CCS, to take us through the rest of today's program. Natalie?
Thank you, Rick. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are absolutely thrilled to share highlights from the 4th edition of the CCS Philanthropy Pulse report, which serves as a data-driven guide to nonprofit fundraising for 2025. This year's report will be publicly available tomorrow, February 13th, and it reflects a really global perspective. We had 650 organizations participate, 16% of which came from outside the US. So for the first time, we have an expanded global participation, which highlights challenges, trends, and opportunities shaping fundraising across geographies and sectors around the world. Notably, 7 of every 10 respondents were either heads of fundraising or heads of their organizations. So this makes the 2025 edition a unique and comprehensive resource for professionals worldwide. So we know that much has happened in the nonprofit world recently, but let's not forget our position of strength. Nearly 2/3, 62% of participating organizations saw revenue growth in 2024 compared to the prior fiscal year. 30% achieved increases of 10% or more, really reinforcing optimism for 2025. Additionally, 72% of organizations that increased their number of new donors also achieved revenue growth in 2024. Let's also remember that giving reached a high watermark in current dollars in the US in 2023, with $557 billion given to charity, with highly anticipated 2024 numbers coming out this June. As always, people are generous and philanthropy is resilient. In our Pulse surveys, we find it important to understand operations and understand what your challenges are to help you better address them as you move forward. So 3 top challenges cited for nonprofits were donor acquisition, donor retention, and efforts in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We see in the survey that 61% of organizations align DEIB with their mission and values, but nearly half of organizations struggle to engage diverse donor groups. We also know that organizations that prioritize inclusive fundraising strategies see stronger donor trust and engagement. So let's look at donor acquisition on the top right chart. 53% of organizations reported an increase in new donors last year, but the rate of organizations reporting an increase has gone down year over year since 2022. You see 30% of organizations saw donor acquisition remain steady, and 17% reported a decrease in new donors. So put simply, fewer organizations are getting new donors, so it remains important for organizations to reach new donors in a targeted, personalized way. And while donor retention efforts are improving, economic uncertainties and limited fundraising staff and resources continue to be significant obstacles to donor retention. You can see additional challenges in the bottom right chart here. And of note, international organizations reported economic factors as a challenge 13% more frequently than their US-based counterparts. While donor acquisition and retention remain top challenges faced by nonprofits in 2024, they are being cited as a challenge less often over time, which signals significant year-over-year improvement in fundraisers adapting to the changing tides of philanthropy and meeting the needs of donors. You can see here on this chart that almost all of the challenges that are being cited less often in 2024 than in 2023 or 2022. And in particular, the amount of respondents citing donor retention as a challenge has dropped by 24% over the last 2 years. That's a good thing. Things are improving. And while there are likely many factors, the rise in generative AI technology is certainly allowing organizations to more easily personalize and customize targeted communications, which is a good thing. And we'll talk more about that. Now let's talk staffing. Staffing is hard in any organization, in any department, but it is especially challenging within development and advancement. A quarter of organizations increased their staffing in 2024 compared to a third that increased their staffing in 2023. About 60% of organizations responded that fundraising staffing levels remain the same as last year, and about 1/5 had fewer staff compared with the prior year. Participating nonprofits shared that limited salary budgets and difficulties in finding qualified candidates are their top challenges regarding staff hiring. Of course, this is further compounded by nearly a third of organizations citing a lack of internal growth opportunities and high turnover rates. So that's intensifying hiring challenges for sure. And those who are hiring are focused on frontline fundraising, major gifts, and corporate and foundation giving. Now, an interesting finding that's in the full report available tomorrow was that investing in fundraising teams was correlated with better financial results. So 70% of organizations that increased fundraising staff pay by 10% or more saw more revenue growth than those that did not increase pay. Now let's look at results relating to donor data, AI, and innovation. So almost half of respondents have not used AI yet, but the number of organizations using AI increased substantially from last year. Almost 2/3 of organizations report their fundraising staff has at least some knowledge of AI technologies, with 34% using generative AI primarily for more strategic communication. And among those utilizing data and AI, personalized donor engagement stands out as a core benefit, a central strategy for many organizations. And as we saw earlier, this use of AI for personalized, targeted communications has likely influenced improvements in donor acquisition and retention. I'm already interested in seeing what this says next year. I think it's going to be even more different. Now, donor data. It's a challenge, but also an opportunity. Almost all organizations report that their fundraising staff is knowledgeable about data-driven decision-making and CRM database usage, but many still face challenges with inaccurate or incomplete data. So more than half, 54% of the organizations surveyed, reported that inaccurate or incomplete data are key challenges to leveraging donor data. So you're not alone. Similarly, 55% of organizations struggle with understanding the right analysis to conduct or lack proper training in data analysis. And while fewer organizations have adopted advanced AI applications like task automation or predictive analytics, AI's growing potential to transform fundraising strategies really highlights its critical role in helping nonprofits improve efficiency, engagement, and competitiveness. So let's look ahead to 2025. Over half of organizations anticipate growth in major and mid-level gifts, underscoring the importance of nurturing high-value donor relationships. And we can move to the next slide where you can see half of organizations also expect increased annual appeals, and 46% predict growth in foundation giving, highlighting the continued reliance on diverse revenue streams for sustainability. Let's move ahead a slide. And you can see a shift is seen in funding sources, with more organizations anticipating corporate support, so 35%, then government grants, 20%, a change from the post-COVID-19 pandemic landscape, and an early shift to adaptation to the new administration. This points to a strategic pivot towards strategies for engaging individuals, foundations, and corporate partnerships to fill in the gaps left by fluctuating government aid. If we move on to our next slide, we see 57% of organizations identified increasing or introducing new revenue streams as either primary or secondary importance to ensuring their fundraising success. So this points to a clear understanding of the need for financial sustainability and growth, even as other areas undergo transformation. And when we look at where organizations cited a primary focus, structural reorganization, skill-based capacity building, and technology advancement were top priorities. We know as nonprofits, we must embrace innovation, data-driven decision-making, and diversified fundraising strategies to sustain growth. Last data slide here before we jump into conversation about non-cash assets. A quarter of nonprofits reported non-cash assets is representing more than 20% of total giving. But an obstacle to increasing non-cash gifts is donor unfamiliarity with these giving options. 45% of organizations cited this as a challenge. Additionally, 48% struggle to effectively communicate non-cash gift opportunities, while 29% point to insufficient staff expertise. Donor advised funds present a significant opportunity as well for nonprofits to expand their charitable revenue, yet few organizations are fully leveraging that potential. The vast majority of respondents, 94%, are familiar with donor advised funds, but only a quarter actively request gifts from them as part of their fundraising strategy. So by taking proactive steps to target donor advised funds and those that are connected with donor advised funds, nonprofits can really unlock a valuable source of funding and broaden their revenue streams. Now, without further ado, we're really excited to move into this panel conversation. We hope this preview of trends and findings that you can dive into tomorrow has been helpful, and hopefully you're looking forward to digging into the full 2025 Philanthropy Pulse report tomorrow. So now I'd love to reintroduce our esteemed panelists from across the philanthropic community, and they'll help us unpack what these themes mean for their organization so we can learn from them. So please join me in welcoming Dennis Surratt, Executive Vice President and Chief Development and Operations Officer at National Urban League. Dennis leads the National Urban League's Partnerships and Advancement Arm and the organization's fundraising efforts. Day to day, he manages the relationships with the Board of Trustees and key coalition partnerships that support the organizational mission. In his 2 decades of leadership with the National Urban League, more than $1 billion has been raised to support the national movement and 92 affiliates throughout the country. He attended Pace University for undergraduate studies and completed his graduate studies with an MBA in finance from Stetson University. Welcome, Dennis. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Kellyanne Nakayama, Chief Development Officer at Japanese American National Museum, has more than 20 years of professional nonprofit fundraising experience with a specialty in capital campaigns and major and principal gifts. Kellyanne provides leadership to the museum's national philanthropic fundraising strategies, including membership, individual and institutional giving, and development operations. She's currently spearheading an $85 million campaign that is already 86% to goal. Way to go, Kellyanne. Kellyanne received her MA in Museum Studies from San Francisco State University, her BA in Anthropology from the University of California, Berkeley, and has professional certificates in philanthropy and fundraising management. Welcome, Kellyanne.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. And Eileen Heisman, founding president and former CEO of National Philanthropic Trust, has served in this role for 27 years. Eileen is a nationally recognized expert on charitable and planned giving and has been interviewed about philanthropy and donor-advised funds on, wait for it, CNBC, PBS, NPR, CNN International, Bloomberg TV, and by nearly every national newspaper and major trade publication. Eileen received a master's degree in social work with a concentration in social program evaluation from the University of Michigan and a bachelor's degree with honors in psychology from Carnegie Mellon University. She's a member of the 3rd Wharton Fellows class at the University of Pennsylvania and completed the executive program for philanthropy leaders at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. Welcome, Eileen.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. We cannot wait to hear your insights. So let's start broadly as we look back to 2024 as a year of growth. You saw that the report highlights nearly 2/3 of organizations experienced revenue growth in 2024, creating optimism for 2025. So Eileen, Kellyanne, Dennis, what do you think drove the successes of 2024?
I don't mind jumping in. I think while the economy was not always the most reliable or stable, I think a majority of the folks that we, especially our major donors, did experience a growth in their investment portfolios, which definitely helped. And then as we get further along past COVID and numbers return to normal, our membership numbers were back up, our visitors numbers were back up. I think that also helped drive some of this increased revenue. And then finally, on the philanthropy side, I think the industry sector's continued focus on individual major gifts, I think that helps and that provides some stability that's a little bit more resilient to these shifting economic and political times.
Thanks, Kellyanne.
Yeah, I made that. I agree with everything you just said, Kelly. I might add, an election year is also a year where people think about the things that matter to them, because it's a year of change and it's a year of decision making. And I find that could be both an albatross, because we always see it as a challenge competing with political fundraising, but it's also an opportunity as well. And I think last year was just a very significant year in how America, or Americans and corporations, were thinking about things that they wanted to double down on and participate in, the impact on DEIB and the like. You had a lot of decision making that was happening among Americans, corporations, foundations, everybody. So I think all of that played into where they wanted to commit. So that added to, I think, value.
When I looked at the data, excuse me, one of the things that struck me is that major gifts are still growing, though fewer households are giving. And so I think we have that deep concentration with the ultra high net worth and the high net worth. And when I was looking at the data and a lack of familiarity with non-cash gifts, I was thinking that it's a really ripe time to think about increasing the value and importance of training staff on that, no matter what kind of role you're in, because I think a lot of the growth that's gone on are non-cash assets. And I think that the charities have to invest in training fundraisers to know and learn more. I was a planned giving person when I was at the front lines, and people always looked at it like, oh, that weird stuff that's going on. But when you look at the data, it's really interesting kind of work to do. And instead of being scared of it, I really encourage people to lean into it. So I think there's a lot of assets there to gather. I also want to say, in addition to voting, I think people in the last 2 or 3 elections have used charitable giving to make a social statement about what they believe in, which is what Dennis was talking about also. And I think that they vote with their charitable gifts, and they vote in the voting place. And when things aren't going their way, they find another way to direct what's important to them and how they want the world to look, because they've made a contribution. So, and that's a long haul. I mean, those things don't change right away.
It's a great point. and leads so well into the future outlook, right? So, you know, a lot has happened in the first month and a half of 2025. As you think about current events, national policy changes, how have they impacted or not impacted your 2025 philanthropic strategy?
So I'll say for the National Urban League, we, it's a year, I think everybody is going into this trying to figure out what it means to them. I don't think anyone's figured it out because I think the government hasn't figured it out, and every day there is, I think we have tons of information flow that's continuously evolving how we need to look at anything. We actually went into 2025 with a stability strategy, right? We really did. It was not let's go after 5 or 10% growth. It was let's make sure we sustain our base. All right, let's make sure that if we need to pivot because federal funds go in a different direction, that we have enough moving in other directions to course correct should we need it. 25% of our budget is federal. All right. And so the impact on us and our 92 affiliates across the country are paramount on our mind in terms of executing our work. And so we went in saying, let's go stable until we learn and understand what the environment looks like. And then we'll go with growth if we need to. But that's how we looked at 2025 just at the moment.
Our organization at the Japanese American National Museum, similar to Dennis, was really highly impacted and by the, or will be continue to be impacted by what's going on in the federal government. We, with the suspension of federal distribution of federal funds, that represented about 10% or $1 million of our annual operating budget. We have at least $2.5 million on top of that pending in capital grants that were awarded. And we're in the midst of this major campaign renovation. And so those funds are being jeopardized, plus $6 million that we submitted recently in requests that are just, there was a whole 6 months worth of time of submitting these pretty lengthy proposals in. And then I'm not sure especially for those arts organizations out there, if you notice the National Endowment for Arts recently pulled back and took away their challenge grants for Museums of America. And those are really focused on underrepresented communities. So for an institution like ours, that was a source of funding or prospective funding that's no longer there. We were doubly challenged with the recent LA fires as well. With the fires going on, with it being just in our backyard, knowing that so many of our staff, our volunteers, our donors were impacted by them, we really put a temporary hold on our communications, our solicitations, focusing just those that are focused around safety instead. We're in the midst of a crowdfunding campaign, $125,000 crowdfunding campaign, and that took a couple of weeks out of that timeline. However, we just finished, right on schedule. We did successfully meet that campaign goal of raising $125,000, all online based. So what that showed me was that, and Rick was alluding to this earlier, that nonprofits, we shouldn't, even in moments of crisis, we shouldn't put things on pause. When a couple of years ago when the Maui fires broke out, we did put a pause on our regional fundraising in that area, trying to be respectful of the local fundraising that was going to be directed to the fires. But looking back, that was probably a misstep. We probably should have still had a continued presence there, continue to build and solicit funds, because as we see with this recent LA fires, that the funding still continued. I think if you focus on the mission, you focus on your cause, your donors are resilient, they'll stay with you. But it has impacted other organizations, especially as when they had to cancel their fundraising events or other program events too. And then the long-term impact, I think we'll also see already $650 million. The LA Times has reported has been raised to support for the LA fire relief. That plus institutional giving, I think that those factors will trail in how we continue to see the impact of those recent events.
That's a lot. I mean, one of my best mentors in the field said to me during one of our sessions that I think was referenced earlier, don't get paralyzed when the world's paralyzed. Continue to make your case, continue to do donor cultivation, remind your donors and prospective donors of what you're doing and what you're about and what you want to do. So when things turn around, you might be front and center. So I completely agree with you, Kellyanne. I mean, and I think we tend to get paralyzed when the world looks paralyzed. We don't want to do things, but it's really the time to really think about things you can do, getting ready for when it turns around. You know, that the regulatory environment is very unpredictable right now, and the government is, we don't know what money is going to be pulled back, what's going to happen, but there's going to big tax and Jobs Act is going to come up for renewal next year, and they're looking for revenue. They want to keep all the tax cuts, but they need revenue, and they're looking to the social sector. And so I think we all need to be watching that really carefully, you know, between the independent sector, the Council on Foundations, the Philanthropy Roundtable, there's an Alliance for Charitable Giving. You should really be keyed into what's going on in the regulatory environment. If you don't have a predictable source, you can pretty easily find the independent sector serves the entire nonprofit sector about what's going on, so you can plan around that. And if they're looking for revenue, they've already taxed certain college endowments of private colleges and universities a couple years ago. So once you start chipping away things that we take for granted, you know, we're called the tax exempt sector sometimes, maybe they aren't so sure. So and it's possible they won't change anything. And I'm optimistic they're going to be nice and kind to the sector, but you can't plan, you know, you have to sort of think what could happen. And the best thing you can do now is get information. And so I would really stay attuned to what's going on in the regulatory environment. In my last several years at NPT, I was really tuned in. And so when I saw something that was scary, I had so much information with me that I didn't get as scared as your average person because I had a lot of background. So I really encourage you to do that.
Yeah. If I could add one point, and that's really, I agree with everything. The fundraising process never changes. It does not. In times that are hard, in times that it just does not change. Your connection to your donor is paramount. You know, during the economic crisis of 2009 and 10, in that space there, you know, we instituted the touch strategy. If you touched your donor 3 times, then you increased it to 5 or 6 times. If you touched them 10 times, then I didn't say 20, but you were going to get to 15. You know, so you had to be able to make sure that you stay close to those that were partnering with you. On the federal side, I want to say to everybody, you know, look, as much as it's all over the place right now, we know that all of the agencies are assessing what's happening in their individual agencies, and they're supposed to provide a report back by March 10th to 15th, somewhere in that space. All right. And so just know that. So it doesn't mean decisions are being made, but we know that the skinny budget is likely coming out somewhere in April. And that's the first indicator. So as you think about where and when triggers may occur, then know what the process is, know and connect that. So in that first skinny budget, that's the first clear indication of the pathway that the administration is going to be deliberate about trying to do. So as long as you know and you plan around that, even though you may get some, you know, impounds, because we're seeing impound orders with several agencies, they haven't necessarily, in some cases they stopped, but right now let's just deal with the timing and disconnect from the noise. All right. Know and understand there's a lot of noise out there, and you can get through this as you go through any economic downturn, upturn, and like we're all survivors, guys. We're all survivors. That's what fundraising is.
I think it's also important to communicate closely with your board as well, too. So we, working closely with our finance committee, our development committee, did an assessment of what is the risk and what is the plan. And one positive thing that came out of it was the chair of our finance committee said, I think this is really underlines the importance of investing in our endowment. And as a result, he's like, I will go back and talk to our family about doing a larger family gift above and beyond our annual giving. And so I think if you engage them, it gives you cover. It helps, you know, you've got more experts on your side to help navigate and develop strategies on how to persevere.
I want to just add an additional thing back on the public policy issue, which is congressmen and congresswomen come back to the districts, you know, in off season, and it's a time to make an appointment or have somebody go with somebody on your board who may or may not know them, and have a really good tight elevator making the case speech for your impact in the community, and have data with you and have something in writing to show to them, because you have to remind them the good that the social sector does, and that quick data points without going into a lot of history of what's going on, but going in, getting their attention for a half an hour and really highlighting what you do and the impact you have. When they're sitting in a committee or listening and there's a vote, they're gonna, if there are a number of you have done that, they're gonna remember, you know, we need to support the social sector. And I think it's, you know, it can be expensive to go to Washington, but when they're in your own backyard, it's really important to have those touches, not when there's a crisis necessarily, but just as to touch base, so people in the regulatory arena know what you're doing.
Incredible advice. Wow. So glad you all are here. Really incredible. And Eileen, I might quote you from here on out. Don't get paralyzed when the world is paralyzed. So thank you so much for your wonderful advice to everyone on the call today. Let's talk about revenue diversification. We've alluded to really the need for that, and we saw that in the data. 57% of nonprofits are prioritizing expanding revenue streams. What are some creative or emerging ways that nonprofits can build financial resilience?
I'm a big plan giving fan, so I'm always encouraging people who are in the fundraising area to have a pipeline of bequests. And bequest programs, you know, there's this data that's a little bit dated that said if you started marketing to people 55 to 65 and over, it'll take you 7 years to realize a gift. But if you're doing that as an ongoing effort and you are promoting bequests, they're often unrestricted or with less restrictions. They're often larger. They can be a non-liquid asset and a liquid asset. And if you're doing it and you're doing that on a rolling basis, that the maturing of those gifts is going to keep going. And so while you can't see their effort if you're starting it in the first year or two, if you start doing it on a rolling basis, you'll see rolling bequests coming in. And I really encourage people, it's not expensive, it's easy to do. You can do it with annual giving donors. And I think it's easy to forget because you don't see the impact right away, but I think it's really important.
Eileen, I'll echo that. Our team has been really focused on blended gifts as well. So asking for maybe a current use gift or a 5-year pledge, and then blending that with also a deferred gift. So at the early start of our campaign, our board chair, who is, you know, solid middle income person, led by example by making $1 million pledge towards the campaign, but she did that through a $250,000 multi-year pledge combined with a bequest gift. But what it did was allowed her to say, I'm taking that first step, I'm going to be your first $1 million donor, but also demonstrating how you could be a little bit more creative in how you structure these gifts. And Eileen, as you were saying earlier too, about training and empowering your staff, they don't need to know the mechanics of all of it. Just know that these are available to start that conversation with their donors, and then bring in myself or others on the team who have a little bit more expertise in helping to really structure those gifts.
That's true. We're also very big with bequest and in that particular space, because we don't want to leave that on the table, and connecting to the older mid to older populations that are serving and providing, you know, support to the National Urban League. We're constantly connecting with them. But I'm also a big believer in creating board strategies, board plans. Every board member's got to have a plan. All right. And connecting with them on the way they continue to support the work that you're doing is key. And then grading them, you know, and promoting it in the boardroom is something that we do. I'm constantly giving highlights on board members that did well. All right. Board members that did something productive. And some of it is connected to planned giving. Some of it is connected to introductions to new businesses and new corporations, new markets, new industries. But it's a constant, it's an active part of what our board meetings are. We have a board of 44 people that represent both corporations and different sectors. And we really spend the time with them. I spend a lot of my time meeting them where they need to be met, because they also have different personalities, as you know. Some want to send letters, some will make calls, some, you know, want to find other ways that they'll send a text message. Just meet them where they, or have an event. But I'm very big with constantly scheduling at least 1 or 2 a year as a way to expand just the base and people that know and understand who we are and what we're about.
Thanks for that reminder. We've been working really closely with our board, especially in our regional outreach. So we're a national organization, but our museum is physically based here in Southern California, just outside of downtown Los Angeles. But we've got board members, we've got members, we've got donors throughout the nation, and we've rallied those regional board members to host events at their homes or in partnership with other community organizations. And that allows us to have an increased visibility in those communities. We also take advantage of any of our traveling exhibitions or programs that are based elsewhere in the world and in the nation, and then try and pair it up with some donor cultivation opportunities. And there's a lot that you could do online too. So even if we've hosted campaign briefings with small groups of folks with alignment, and even done ones virtually for a specific region. And the hook on that one is just highlighting regional stories, regional donors, things that will resonate more closely with those folks.
Thanks,
I
Kelly.
just want to add, gifts of illiquid assets are really abundantly out there. But if you don't hear and or listen or know what to pay attention to, you don't necessarily get it in a conversation with a donor, potential donor. So if you think there's something there, bring somebody else in. I really encourage, often, even if you hear the slightest reference to an asset, a real estate, a part of a company, tangible personal property that might be, donatable. We've got a number of unusual things at NPT that when I was younger, I would have said, oh, nobody's ever going to give that. And we were able to figure out a way. We got a Picasso, actually. We never actually took possession of. It stayed at Sotheby's, but which was pretty unusual. But I just want to encourage people, don't be afraid of plan giving. And you can also cultivate and talk to estate and tax lawyers. We did a lot of that. And so you're talking to advisors where there may be a client who doesn't know what they want to give to, and they have an illiquid asset, it would be to their benefit. And sometimes if you're really scared of the risk attached to it, there's entities out there who can help do it. Sometimes community foundations can be a partner to take those. Some of the National Donor Advised Fund programs, Jewish Federations, Catholic Charities, the Federated Funders will sometimes have really good plan giving departments, and they'll take the gift, liquidate it, and give the net assets to you, so you don't have to do it yourself. So you should not wait for one to be at your doorstep. You should see who's out there who might be able to help you take a plan gift. The other thing I just want to say, because I'm a big plan giving fan, is one of my, another mentor early in my career said she had to go to 7 plan giving seminars before she really got it. And so when you first hear the plan giving concept and you go, what are they talking about? And this woman ran a big community foundation for a long time. That the best of us and the smartest had to go and get a lot of repetition and learning it. So don't be afraid to sign up for it with webinars now. Pay attention, shut your email down and really pay attention. And after you've heard it 3 or 4 times, I don't know if 7's really the magic number, it'll start to sink in. And when you know it, you're more likely to hear the hints and information from a donor or their advisor or lawyer when there is an illiquid asset that they might be willing to gift over to you. And that kind of plan giving is very different than bequests, right? Bequests are deferred. Those will be given to you the year that they make the gift, they surrender the asset, even though you may not be able to liquidate it right away. You might have to hold on to it for a little while. But I just want to encourage you to be brave about learning about it. Don't be afraid.
Good advice. Thanks, Eileen. Terrific. Let's talk a little bit about donor acquisition and retention. We see this as a cited challenge year over year. What are you finding most effective in acquiring and retaining donors?
Oh my gosh, this is when I constantly say the same thing, stay close. I've been here, in the time that I've been here, we started small, but they didn't have, excuse me, it seemed as though there was more of a replace strategy than a sustain and grow strategy, right? And so it was really just creating a different way of thinking. Everyone that is your base is staying, right? And you have to meet with them to listen and understand what it is that they need to connect the dot, whether they're an individual or otherwise. And a lot of that has to do with what Eileen was saying. You got to know your impact. You got to know your community. You got to know who you're serving and why. And then you got to communicate to those that are providing you with resources. The better that you bring them along with you on the journey, the longer they stay. I don't know what's going on there, but so we have instituted what we call for individual donors inside the movement. And what it is that we open a line once a quarter and we invite all of our individual donors on, and we highlight key areas of the work that we're doing as a way to reinforce, why or the value of their contribution, and to report back on the activities that we're doing. We do something similar with our corporate partners, right? And then we invite them to bring other people on to hear the work that is happening. We have open town hall meetings, all right, that are virtual in the space. So the more we're communicating with the masses, the people, and they're hearing, even if they don't decide now, we create a scenario for follow-up. All right. And so as we do that one is we're seeking ways to once again sustain who our current donor base is. And then at the same time, give them the opportunity to bring somebody along in a maybe less intrusive way at times. It's light, it's nice, but we can still get back to them. So we found that to be very effective with the base strategy on both sides, both corporate and foundations. And then we do funder breakfasts on a regular basis as well. So we invite people to come in, existing partners, and bring somebody. So we do that in different parts of the country. So we're always in the space of trying to sustain, and always in the space of acquiring new friends that want and hear and know and can connect to the journey of supporting the communities that we serve.
It's funny, Dennis. I felt like very unusual for at the Japanese American National Museum, we actually had a different problem where our donor member retention, at least, was incredibly high. So we had an 87% member retention, but it was really, how do we then grow to the next stage? How do we increase and attract new members as well? And I have to give a lot of credit to our marketing team and how closely they work and how deliberate they are of not only just reaching out to folks, getting them inside our door, but once they come visit us, capturing those email addresses that then feed into your newsletter, and your newsletter into your annual appeal into those gifts that you target, and the major gift officers follow up with that. But when we were looking at our membership base too, it was, and we surveyed them and asked, what memberships do you enjoy? And you could do the same thing with your donors. Why do you support? And it wasn't so much about the benefits, as I'm sure with many other membership organizations, but for us, it was really about belonging. And the Japanese American National Museum is really about that Japanese American identity. And even though there's there's a large diversity within the Japanese American community, there is a sense. And so this organization, I think, represents just as much that community belonging. And so how we activate that is to use our donors to talk about why they support, tell us about their giving journey, whether that's part of a cultivation tactic or it's part of even putting those quotes up with our annual appeals as well. I think, seeing your faces, seeing the diversity of the community, seeing, diversity in terms of ages, the mixed ethnicity as well too, that's really important. It's just reinforcing those core values of why folks are affiliated and support our institution.
I think the idea that fundraisers are storytellers is a theme we can't lose. And you don't remember data, but you remember how somebody made you feel. And so part of our job is to translate it from the program mission side to the donor by having really interesting stories. Like I literally, I love data, but I don't think data is necessarily what pushes people over the edge to either stay involved in. So I just want to encourage you to remember that you have to be really good friends with the program side and translate successes of your organization so you can explain it to donors, because it's going to want to make them stay and continue to be a part of that. And you can't tell the same story that you told 3 years ago, right? You have to have a refreshing group of rotating stories, which means that you have to be out there in the program area knowing what's going on. And I think that's really important. Somebody, one of my best friends from college who lives in Los Angeles, said to me, I'll never forget this. She said, you know what the most exciting thing is? And this is when we were in college. I was like 20 when I heard this. I said, what? And she said, when somebody you like tells you that they like you back. And that's what our donors are telling us. I mean, and she was saying it about a romantic way, but you know, when somebody gives you a gift or they have given you a gift, they're telling you you like them. And so it's your job, our job, to say we like you back. And how does that manifest itself in a development job? And it's, you don't just say, oh, I'm going to go to the next person. You know, that kind of keeping that relationship going, just like your personal life, is really an important thing to think about and really measure. And you know, if you're going to go on your second or third time, whether it's a good friend or romantic or whatever it is, you're going to think about what you're going to do. You know, we're going to meet for coffee. We're going to go to the movies. We're going to, invite somebody's house for dinner. And so those same principles are what makes the development work really gratifying, but also really intentional. And people used to say to me, oh, you're just going to parties or you're just going to these events. I'm sure you're having a good time. And I said, I'm working every second. Working every second. I may look like I'm having a good time, but it's really the intentionality of all of those, moves and management should be really careful and not to forget that those people need to be told and reminded, yes, I'd like you back.
Yeah, I can add to, I love that, Eileen. No, I absolutely love that. And don't be scared to ask the question, how do you want to be communicated with? I mean, honestly, it's one of those things where we want to make assumptions, but we don't ask the question. If we can ask them for their contribution and support, we can ask them also how they want to be communicated with. Because a lot of times what you'll hear is, yeah, you call me when it's time to make the contribution again, right? Or you communicate when that happens and say, you want to, some of that will always happen. But to ask the question how is really respectful. It's just respectful. And adding all the other strategies, it just continues to add the value. So just don't forget that when you're communicating with the folks that are supporting you and partnering with you or your friends.
That's really good. And we talked a little bit about storytelling, right? Let's dig into that. So would love to know, how are you thinking about the best way to share your message with donors? Are you changing your case messaging, or are you exploring any new strategies?
I think people, I use overall numbers as an impact. So what the national stat on X is, and our theory of change or our solution to that is, and the impact has been the following. And let me tell you a story of Eileen. And I share that story, and so because people communicate different, they hear different, and you have to connect with them on different levels. And so I've always kind of created storylines around that theory in connecting the dots. So whether it's around education, whether it's housing in a family, achieving a home for the first time, or a health-related issue, it's always connecting multiple dots and layering it down to the one. And I think you said it best, change your stories, right? Don't use the same story every single time, but then know and connect to your program teams. And really part of the thing that we do is we're constantly seeking new success stories as a part of the grant making. Keep bringing them back to us so that we can translate them for those that are supporting us on the other side.
We've got a beautifully diverse team, especially with our major gift officers. And we've got a core story that we share at the museum. But what I love is after being on several visits together, I noticed how effective our gift officers were when they inserted a little bit of their own story into the institutional narrative. And even though I think I'm the only frontline fundraiser that's Japanese American in our group, but each of our team gift officers and even our the ones who aren't frontline fundraisers, there's a reason why they joined our organization. And when they open up and they personalize that and speak from the heart, it resonates so strongly. So I think maybe it's not like the leading strategies, but one of the side things that we discovered is like lean into that a little bit, like, bring that part of yourself into that process. And it just makes that all the more genuine connection, I think.
Absolutely.
I just to echo, I agree with both of those. I think that's the thing that's been struck me the most in the last few years is we have so many ways to communicate with donors now. When I was growing up, and everything was in print. and now we're digital. And even in the digital world, there's all these different ways to talk to the donors. So you have to sort of know, talk about donor segmentation. You have to sort of know who they are. And like Dennis said, how do they want to be communicated with? And I teach a philanthropy and fundraising class at Penn. And there was a student in my class who was really young, and she worked in the fundraising department, and her whole job was using text messages to get people to make annual gifts. That was her job. And so I used to call on her to teach that when I would say, so what are they doing with your Jen? Like, what are you doing digitally? And that was her expertise. And of course she left, and next semester, I didn't know anybody who knew that. But as technology changes, the use of it and how we talk to people, and it used to be, they said baby boomers would never make online gifts, and now they're doing it all the time. So it's not even it's not dormant, it's dynamic. And so you have to be watching all the different ways. You might solicit them on a piece of paper and even direct mail, but they give online, right? So you have to be really agile. You have to know all the different communication tools that you have, all the different digital tools, what age they are. I mean, it's really a multi-complex grid, and it's ever changing. So think about that. And like 2 years later, it may be different. And so it's a very agile business that we're in, because you have to really be willing to adapt to things that are in progress. And you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to learn from them, and you're going to move on. But if if you're doing, 15, 16 color brochures in print to make your case, like you might have 20 years ago, you're not in the present. And we have far fewer time to catch people's attention, right? Whatever it is, 16 seconds. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a big TikTok fan, but 16, whatever number of seconds that you have is what the attention span is a lot of times. So you better know how to make your case and really grab people. I just want to say about the Super Bowl, and I'm a Philadelphian, so I really have had a happy week, is that there was an ad, and I thought it was going to be for a kids' cancer hospital, but I don't know if you remember the ad. There was a little boy, a little Asian boy, who was running. And I don't know if you know this, but when kids are cancer-free and they leave the hospital, they have applause for them through the corridors. I get chills just talking about this. And it was a little boy who was running out, and you saw the nurses clapping for him. And I said, like, my friends started talking. I'm like, wait a minute, this is a cancer survivor, this little kid. And I got everybody's attention in the room, and he's running. And then they create this whole thing, like he's doing a marathon or something, but he ends up running into his house. He turns into his other self, runs into his house, and they show him with a bald head, and they show him during his chemo, and they show him. And I was kind of on the edge of my seat. And it turned out to be a pharmaceutical ad. But to me, it was one of those things where I don't remember how any of the other ads made me feel, but that was a story. They were telling a story in pictures and moving pictures. If you have a chance to look at that ad, it was brilliantly done. And I just think there's ways we have to be, in addition to using all the data, all the kinds of digital data we need to like figure out how to talk to people, we have to translate what we're doing in ways that move people. And it's really important, and it's not easy. It's not easy. And I think that fundraisers have to be experts in so many different disciplines. I think we're really underrated for our agility, literally. I mean, I always say to my students, it's really interesting work, because no matter what you're good at, there's 5 or 6 other things you have to learn. And so you have to figure out how to spend your time, and who around you is good in your team. If you're not the best at X, then get somebody else around you who can help you with it.
I think we also have
Absolutely.
opportunities to test messages too. So prior to the launch of our public phase of our campaign, we did small group briefings and tested the message, got some great feedback. And what we learned is that there's our donor base, especially our major donor base, was still pretty diverse in their thinking, their political spectrums. So it's helped us kind of thread that needle where we were emphasizing the values and of the organization, but not getting too polarized one way or the other, where it would be off-putting. With that said, though, with with all the recent executive orders, the attack on immigration and DEI, this is an opportunity for our board to reassess and say, what is our case message? How strong are we going to be? And in this instance, they decided that they're doubling down. But I mean, again, that's a great conversation to have with your board and figuring out what is that core message. And sometimes you thread it, and sometimes you just go full force.
And I'm gonna throw something out here. So we know that one of the biggest issues that a lot of nonprofits have across the country is connected to the case for support. All right. And because we don't double down on it. We don't double down. We don't teach our board members that this is what they need to do. This is their elevator pitch as well. So messaging is just as important. Your organization is on all of their resumes, right? And profiles. And can they accurately describe who you are, what you do, and the impact that you make? And so, if they can't, they're not making your job easier. So what you really, when we talk about messaging and we talk about storytelling, it's internal out, not external in, and if you're focused on doing that and creating that process and functionality within your organization, you have a better chance to, one, sustain because everybody's on the same page and they know and understand what you're accomplishing and the community that you're serving, and they can share that story as well. See, because remember, what you're building is a team of marketers, a team of outreach folks, and a team of fundraisers. That's what we're accomplishing through the roles that we have as heads of fundraising, development, whatever you want to call it. All right, but if you got to train your internal team first, you got to be key with what that case for support is, and then you can move on from there.
Absolutely. And we're seeing questions in the Q&A around AI and messaging and all the rest. I know we only just have a few minutes left with you, but to everyone on the webinar, we'll follow up with some answers to some of these questions as well, and we'll ask our panelists to weigh in. But just really on our last 3 minutes together, would love to ask, talking about the future of philanthropy and future-proofing your organizations. If there is one action that nonprofits should focus on to future-proof their organizations, what would you think it would be?
Adaptability.
Oh my God, that was literally my word.
Was it good?
It really was.
You know what? Adaptability and making the case, adaptability and using tools, adaptability and learning new things. I was in an organization once, and there was a whole thing about revenue, about how we capture revenue. And it was a nonprofit. And I said, if we do it that way, we're leaving money on the table. And I said to this woman, can't we change it? And she said, no, that's the way we always do it. That was her answer. And I thought to myself, if I'm ever in charge of anything, and I was far from being in charge, I'm never going to have that as an okay answer. So that's the way we always did it, is not a reason to keep doing things the way you've done them. So that constant learning, curiosity, and being adaptable and knowing how to apply it.
Yes.
Mine would be diversify. So diversifying your donor base, diversifying, the generations of the ages of your donors as well too. How do you engage that next generation? And then diversifying the industry too, to have more of your philanthropic professionals who are from BIPOC communities or from LGBTQ communities as well too. Because I think that's really, you need that common, the ability to, and that cultural competency as well, and approachability, I think helps.
And just don't forget, relationship. It's not just a word. It really is everything in the business that we have, right? It really is. And for me, it'll always be, I'm the forever student. I don't know how not to be. I'm just naturally curious about everything. My kids are constantly telling me how I have just, where did that fact come and why is it even relevant and why did you say it? But I'm always curious about things, and it allows us to continuously connect to where people are, just meeting them, in those moments. It matters.
It absolutely does. Outstanding. Well, we cannot thank you enough, Kellyanne, Dennis, Eileen. This has been an incredible conversation. We could talk for hours. Your insights were outstanding and just provided so much value to all of us on the call and who will view this recorded webinar. Thank you so very much. On behalf of Rick, myself, our colleagues across CCS, and our panelists, thanks everyone for joining today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks so much.